Katoa. Welcome back, everybody. We're into our next session, the workshop on the LTP strategies. Today we're talking about 4 strategies that will form the basis of the work streams and budgets that go into the long-term plan. We've got the infrastructure strategy, the water services strategy, the environmental strategy, and the trade waste discharge plan. We are being live streamed again, councillors. Just a reminder to have your phones turned on silent. And I will now hand over to the team to deliver the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Russell will walk us through the presentation. I just want to make a couple of comments. Regardless of the nature of the discussion we had earlier about the 3 waters options, if we park it aside for a minute, obviously, for us, we're heading towards the formulation of the considerations for the long-term plan of the Council. We do have a legislative requirement to form long-term strategies, and one of the most critical of those strategies is our infrastructure strategy and our water services strategy that inform our financial strategies. So, in actually getting ready to have these conversations with elected members, it's quick introduction to what those strategies aim to achieve, how those strategies, should presented and communicated with elected members. So when you're making decisions about these communities' investments, in a significant body of assets and assets that provide critical services to the community are formulated, and therefore you have a good understanding as to the overarching principles behind our strategies and what kind of objectives we're pursuing through those strategies. So that effect, I'll let Russell to commence with that, and obviously you're happy to take any questions that may come out of these presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stavros. So the 4 strategies you want to talk around today are the infrastructure strategy, the water service strategy, the environmental strategy, and the trade waste discharge plan. 2 of them are reviews of ones we've already got, so the infrastructure strategy and the environmental strategy. The water services strategy and the trade waste discharge plan are new, so I'll talk through a little bit around those. The 30-year infrastructure strategy provides a long-term view of Council's infrastructure assets, the services they deliver and the challenges likely to affect them in the future. It identifies key infrastructure issues, assesses the range of options available to address them, and considers the operational, financial, environmental and risk implications of each. The strategy supports informed decision-making by balancing service delivery, resilience, affordability and community expectations, while guiding investment and asset management planning over the next 30 years. The strategy identifies the significant investment decisions required to maintain service levels, support growth and respond to changing regulations and community needs. The strategy ensures infrastructure is delivered to an appropriate standard while remaining aligned with the financial strategy, enabling Council to make informed decisions about what can be afforded, when investments should occur and how they will be funded. So a significant change in the infrastructure strategy is that the water services activities, so the water supply, stormwater and wastewater, are no longer included within the strategy. And this reflects the requirements of the Local Government Water Services Act, which requires Council to prepare a water services strategy as a standalone strategic document. The water service strategy will provide the long-term direction for the planning, delivery, funding and management of water services and will sit alongside rather than within the infrastructure strategy. Following the separation of water services into a standalone water service strategy, land transport is now the only core infrastructure activity that is required to be included in the infrastructure strategy under current legislative requirements. However, Council can choose to broaden the scope of the infrastructure strategy to include additional infrastructure-intensive activities that have significant long-term asset management and investment requirements. So in addition to land transport, the 2027 infrastructure strategy will include facilities and property, solid waste services, and parks and open spaces engineering infrastructure. Including these activities will provide a more comprehensive picture of Council's long-term infrastructure challenges, investment needs and service delivery requirements across a wider range of community assets. This approach will support more integrated planning, improved asset management and better informed decision making regarding future capital investment and funding priorities. So these are the replacement values of the groups of assets that will be included. So $1.8 billion of assets, of which most is transport and facilities. So the infrastructure strategy will address 4 key challenges over the next 30 years. Meeting future demand for infrastructure, responding to climate change and environmental pressures, maintaining assets in a safe and reliable condition, and improving the resilience of critical infrastructure to extreme weather events. These challenges will drive future investment decisions and require a balanced approach that delivers reliable services while remaining affordable and sustainable for the community.
Just before we move on, there's a question here. What is actually engineering infrastructure for parks and open spaces?
Inside the parks and open reserves, there is a roading network, there are footpaths, there are parking spaces, street lighting. Those are captured by the infrastructure strategy. We're not talking about the soft parks and reserves components. This is just the hard engineering services inside parks and reserve spaces.
Okay, and also just on that facilities and property, is that also the property that's been identified as part of the property strategy that we're about to implement, so that we're talking about that group of properties in
That's correct.
Yes. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. So also just referring to that again, as raised by Deputy Mayor, Puke Tawhito Park, would that be included in that? Any car parks, etc. in there?
Yeah, engineering components within those parks, parking spaces and capping and channeling and things like stormwater, systems, that's part and parcel of that.
So would that include future ones?
Especially we know it at the moment.
Thank you.
If we know about it, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Some good questions. Can I just jump in through you, Madam Chair? The purpose of the strategy is to largely inform future investment. So if you want future investment in curbs and channels and car parks on reserves, it's part of the infrastructure strategy, even though it's a reserve. So I think that sometimes we may say reserves are different from infrastructure, and that's largely true, but in terms of the infrastructure strategy, the future investments in infrastructure, whether on reserves or on public roads or on council property, all turns up here. Getting some nods? Okay, thank you.
And one more question, two more questions. Councillor Temera Benfeld and Councillor Sandford.
Kia ora, thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. Just a question regarding the infrastructure strategy. I'm just wondering, is this a purely internal document, or how do, at this end, how do iwi and how do stakeholders feed into the long-term strategy at a very early stage of its development, and not towards the end when we're asking for an opinion and it's been shaped? How does that occur?
Well, the primary audience here is elected members. You make funding and revenue decisions on that infrastructure strategy. That infrastructure strategy, draft infrastructure strategy, would be part and parcel of your long-term plan deliberations and community consultation, and that consultation will accumulate into an open public consultation that will provide feedback for you elected members to adopt it later on in around about May, June next year. It will form part and parcel of your long-term plan. As part and parcel of those consultation processes, obviously, we discuss with iwi, especially landowner partners, like Agiwewe here or Ngatikia, where we share resource concerns and so on. And obviously those parties are aware of what they intend to do in terms, of infrastructure that is embodied into the operational agreements we have with them. But the general purpose of infrastructure, water services, stormwater services, wastewater services, roading services and so on, it's a document that we developed just now. And obviously, we're going to have ongoing conversations with relevant parties.
Just a supplementary question. So I suppose at this stage of the process, one thing that stuck in our conversations with the iwi chairs is around how early they come into the formation or ideation process prior to it going out for consultation. Because by that point we've determined all of the borders, I suppose, of what something looks like by that point. So does a mechanism exist in the ideation phase to support the input of iwi as we go through this point? And I think particularly in this area, given a lot of our assets are actually on either iwi land or gifted reserve. And so how do we, not towards the back end after we've done everything and said, what do you think of this? Actually, what does this look like at the very front end? Is there a mechanism, does a mechanism exist for that?
Yeah, I might ask Sam and maybe Paul to give us some advice on this, but I understand that the infrastructure strategy is actually a mandatory document as part of the long-term plan. And so elements of what it needs to cover are actually defined by the same regulations that cover long-term planning. In terms of pre-engagement with Māori and with iwi, Paul looks like he's stepping up, so he's going to talk about that, and then maybe throw to Sam as well if required.
Tēnā Council, through you, Madam Chair. That's simply a directive from Council, and then we work alongside the workstream to identify the opportunities for them to come in the ideation at that early onset, and then that can be then your consideration about those guardrails or how you want to frame that up. So if it's the appetite and the willingness of the elected members that we want that information during the setup phase as opposed to traditionally at a later date, it's as simply as taking that and we put it in. I'll leave. I'm going to take a liberty here because this is a topic that is coming up through our protocols, and we do have protocols that actually say early engagement in the LTP, and we heard that last week with Tūhaurangi as well. So this is timely for you to have that conversation.
Thank you, and I'll hand over to Sam for further.
Really nothing to add, but to Andrew's point, it is a legislative part of the LTP process that we need to do, but nothing in addition to what Paul's covered.
Thank you.
If I that nailed exactly my thinking on the head. So I suppose it becomes and this is probably more of a rhetorical question for councillors to consider, is how do we begin shaping that up? Because Paul's just mentioned, and I'm certainly, and actually probably all of us can verify that that's been a reoccurring message from iwi leaders across the rohe. How do we come in very early prior to, once we've already set everything up, what do you think? That I think has been the trend of council because of the way that things have been moving. That's been the trend, is to say, this is what we're thinking, what do you think? Actually, how do we shape things up together? And we've got a couple of good examples under our belt now, even in this triennium, of what that can look like. So potentially something for consideration is to, instead of waiting for that prescribed period of consultation, actually at the very front end, when we're having discussions like this, how do we involve our partners in the spirit of partnership in those conversations? So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and thank you for your comments and the ideas. It's probably something that needs to be thought about in more detail before we make any decisions on that. But thank you. Councillor Sanford.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. My question is essentially exactly the same as the Deputy Mayor's, but just wanting a bit more clarity around engineering infrastructure versus built infrastructure. I'm assuming that, let's say, playgrounds, toilets and terraces on like terraced seating on sports fields would be built infrastructure and not engineering infrastructure. Is that correct?
Just to make a quick point to Councillor Benford's conversation, obviously, the earliest we communicate with the entire community about what an infrastructure strategy involves, just to remind the elected members, and again, it's a broad brush, we have, you, as elected members, are in custody and stewardship of about $3 billion worth of assets, built assets, roads, carriageways, footpaths, street lighting poles, pipes, pump stations, treatment plants, and so on. The vast majority of your current and future investment in infrastructure is into maintenance and renewal of existing assets. Very little goes into new assets or expansion of existing infrastructure. So therefore, from engineering perspective and from your investment responsibilities perspective, that is decisions you have to make consistent with legislative requirements as to, especially now you are highly regulated under your three waters regime, that you need to invest the appropriate amount of money into maintenance and renewal of assets. And obviously, strategies, like property strategy, will incorporate elements which says, which parts of the portfolio are critical or non-critical, and when assets are not critical to your requirements in the future, there's a policy of how to deal with that, in due course. But I think we'll do our best, to communicate, early on. But I think to a large degree, a lot of the investment that you vote for as elected members, it's about the allocation of the appropriate maintenance and renewal components on existing infrastructure, and not so much about new infrastructure. New infrastructure has got its own consultation, parameters.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, I will ask Russell to move on. Thank you.
So we'll next move on to the water service strategy. So under the Local Government Water Services Act, every water service provider is required to prepare and maintain a water services strategy. This becomes Council's primary long-term planning document for water services. The strategy will set out the long-term direction for how water services are managed, funded, maintained, renewed and developed to meet community needs and regulatory requirements. Provides a clear framework for assessing future service levels, infrastructure investment needs, growth demands, resilience requirements and environmental outcomes. The strategy also strengthens accountability by clearly articulating the intended outcomes, planned investments and performance expectations for water services over the long term. The introduction of the water service strategy replaces the water services component that would previously have formed part of Council's long-term plan, creating a dedicated and more transparent planned framework for water services. The water service strategy will clearly articulate what water supply, wastewater and stormwater services will be provided, including the levels of service that customers and communities can expect. It will define the desired outcomes and performance standards for water services, ensuring there is transparency around service quality, reliability, public health, environmental protection and resilience objectives. The strategy will identify the infrastructure investment required to achieve these outcomes and maintain agreed levels of service, and it will demonstrate how investment will be funded and remain financially sustainable, balancing service expectations, affordability, intergenerational equity, and prudent financial management. The strategy will also show how regulatory requirements will be met, including compliance with drinking water, wastewater, environmental and economic regulation obligations. Importantly, it will outline how sufficient capacity will be provided to accommodate future growth, ensuring water services can support residential, commercial and industrial development over the life of the strategy. These are the replacement values, so there's $1.3 billion worth of water assets that Council owns. So there are 5 key challenges facing Council over the next 30 years. Providing infrastructure capacity to meet future demand, responding to climate change and environmental pressures, maintaining assets in a safe and reliable condition, making appropriate investments across the the asset life cycle, and improving the resilience of critical infrastructure to maintain service continuity. Addressing these challenges will be essential to delivering reliable, sustainable and affordable services to the Rotorua community.
Might just pause there and take some questions if that's okay. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. Just a quick one, Russell or Stavros. Does this strategy inform the rating for example, pan charges on hotels, motels and accommodation? Would we draw from this for that?
Yeah, the Three Waters strategy is informed by asset management for water supply, wastewater and stormwater. And obviously the costs as required to provide these services then are converted into funding and revenue policy, and you decide as elected members how you distribute those costs. You've got the user charges, you've got general rates and so on. So our effort at this point in time is to understand the services we need to provide, what kind of investment is required in these particular services, how that investment is split into maintenance, renewal, upgrades, and growth related. Growth related usually informs your development contributions policy, or the distribution of costs, in terms of the average household use versus a hotel is guided by your funding and revenue policies, which you make separately in your financial strategy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Stavros and Russell. Just a question around the investment in the assets and how that will be funded and ensuring that it's financially sustainable. I guess it's just around process of ensuring that the depreciation is adequately funded and how that is going to be ring-fenced for that specific asset.
Maybe I'll jump in, Councillor Wang. We will tackle that through the financial strategy and some options for you through that. This is more around, these two strategies are more around developing those requirements, and the financial strategy is more about how we fund them. I think I understand your question. We'll bring it to you as part of the financial strategy.
Just to reinforce my chief executives, our job as engineers is to tell you or inform you that the some 276,000 pieces of assets you've got that form your infrastructure networks, each one of them has got a design life expectancy, and that expectancy informs your depreciation and give you advice as to what level of funding you need to meet to maintain the currency of that asset. So as our job, the financial strategy will come then to decide how you look at your resources to that effect.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you for your indulgence. Another one popped into my head. Would this also include, given the scale of it, the potential investment required for the Rotoiti wall?
Do you mean the Ohau Channel?
No, the wall in Lake Rotoiti that's full of holes.
Yes, that's the Ohau Channel wall.
The Ohau Channel, you mean? That's not our asset, Councillor. That's the Bay Plan, the regional council asset.
Right, okay.
I don't think I would ask you to fund the regional council's assets.
Prefer not to take that on. Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Just one from me, maybe this. So the water services strategy informs the water services delivery plan. Is that how the relationship between those documents works?
The water service delivery plan was the initial plan that went to government around how we would deliver. This is required in every LTP about how you deliver this stuff.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
You cannot decouple the two together. To deliver something, you need to have assets, and to have to manage the assets, you need to maintain them.
Thank you. Right, we'll move on to the environmental strategy. Thanks, Russell.
Okay. So the environmental strategy provides a clear framework for how Council will protect and restore the environment while delivering essential services to the community. It aims to reduce the environmental impacts and risks associated with our activities, support long-term environmental health and resilience, meet evolving community expectations, and ensure we fulfil our legislative obligations. Ultimately helps guide decisions that balance environmental stewardship with sustainable growth and development. The strategy sets out how Council will manage its activities and programs to protect and improve environmental outcomes, provides a framework for identifying and managing environmental risks, integrates environmental considerations into infrastructure planning and investment decisions, and establishes a 30-year objectives framework that guides the infrastructure strategy and asset management plans. This ensures environmental stewardship is embedded in Council's long-term planning and decision-making. So the strategic themes focus on 4 key areas which are carried over from the 2024 plan. Working collaboratively to restore biodiversity and strengthen ecosystem health, reducing the environmental impacts of Council's infrastructure, promoting waste minimisation and resource recovery, and minimising Council's environmental footprint while improving resilience to climate change and other emerging environmental challenges. Together, these themes provide a practical framework for delivering positive environmental outcomes for the community and future generations. The strategy will set out the actions and indicative timing required to achieve long-term environmental objectives over the next 30 years. Rather than attempting to predict every future action, it will take an adaptive approach that focuses on agreed priorities and desired outcomes, allowing Council to respond to challenging circumstances, emerging risks and new opportunities. To ensure it remains relevant and effective, the strategy and its associated actions is reviewed and re-evaluated every 3 years as part of Council's ongoing planning and decision-making processes.
Well, just check in and see if there's any questions from the councillors on this particular strategy. Yes, Councillor Metapsel.
Thank you. I suppose as time's gone on and we deal with a multitude of crises now, we have, I feel, lost focus of the need to mitigate, adapt, prepare, plan for climate change. And we do often find that it's our vulnerable or lower socioeconomic communities that find themselves at most risk. So I just want to know where that sits in this environmental strategy, in particular when we consider the risk of flooding and high lake levels, and in a way geothermal as well to some of our villages, including Ohinemutu, Whakarewarewa, and even with geothermal, we know that with intense rainfall, it disturbs the geothermal field as well. So I'm just wanting to make sure that somewhere in this that is incorporated, and we're not losing sight of climate change, understanding that we have a very real responsibility in civil defence emergency management.
It's quite a lot to take in, Your Worship, indeed, but I think yes, those strategies, both the Three Water strategy, our infrastructure strategy, and our environmental strategy, studies are all informed by environmental and climate change impacts. Quick examples: stormwater management. As you know, we are working towards heavy rain events mitigation through attenuation dams and enhancement of conveyance capacity. In terms of our transportation, we have some key challenges in the rural sector. As you're aware, last year we had 2 significant culvert failures that resulted in significant expenditure, and thankfully not to a death, but because one of our residents fell into one of these collapsed culverts. So our transportation strategy needs to identify the vulnerabilities, because we do have increasingly more frequent events of heavy rainfall, and obviously we'll have to be more proactive in identifying potential failures like that. In terms of our geothermal activities, you should be aware, and I think by now, that when I've said earlier we are signing a design life to all our 276,000 types of assets, a concrete manhole that's sitting on top of Pukehangi will have a design life of 100 years. A concrete manhole near the government gardens would derate it down to maybe 20 years. So we're making provisions for the life expectancy of geothermal activities. We are learning too, especially our water supplies and so on. We're using geothermal activity resistance material, these days, to make sure that we are complying with that. We do have, you are building at the moment an upgraded wastewater treatment plant that will meet our environmental targets in terms of target nitrogen and phosphorus discharges and other contaminants into the environment. So yes, climate change adaptation is part and parcel of our long-term aims and objectives, and obviously the rate for which you can achieve that, it has to be balanced against this community's affordability, how much you can do within a given time frame.
Thank you, and do really appreciate that, and also given that the strategic direction and actions are reviewed and reevaluated every 3 years, we know that in that time we will have the transition of some regional council functions. We're yet to know what that looks like, but certainly the governance side by 2028. So, and I suppose it comes back to the question from Councillor Patterson as well. Although currently there are assets and potential liabilities that we have no knowledge of with Bapeni Regional Council that we may acquire, understanding that right now we are probably more focused on business as usual to complete that. I just think in particular for this strategy, given the change in the reforms that we do know, is that something that will be taken into consideration so we can fully understand, as I mentioned, the functions, the assets and potential liabilities when it comes to the management of the air, water and land, which is the core focus of Regional Council at the moment?
The answer is yes. We do have with the Plenty Regional Council what you call a collaboration group that we are working already together onto stormwater management, waterways, streams. We all understand the undercapacity waterways such as Nukotaha. We all understand that Lower Yudahina has not been performing at its design capacity for almost 60 years. We all understand that for lake levels to be managed more effectively, it will need to be some intervention in increasing the discharge capacity of the Ohau Channel and the Okiri Falls. Now, as part and parcel of our strategy, and obviously if the signals are going to be that we will inherit some of these activities from the Regional Council, then obviously we need to pay a lot more attention in actually taking stock of their assets and their regulatory and operational responsibilities to incorporate in the next 3 year long-term plan. So we don't have all the details, but I think we understand enough of the liabilities, and I will remind elected members when the Plenty Regional Council elected members presented to you, I think it was about a month ago, about the services they provide here. They noted that they provide services to Rotorua in the tune of $45 million per year. And you probably noticed that within that $45 million a year, about $11 or $12 million were planning services. So the question is to, where that revenue generated by the Regional Council should be dedicated into planning or into operations. That's a question for later.
Thank you, and I'm sure there'll be many questions, and I will say that I think we should be looking at this as an opportunity, not necessarily a burden that we have to carry or a challenge that we now have to find ways to fund. This is actually an opportunity for us as to unite through a unitary authority both local and regional council functions and ensure that in Rotorua specifically we are delivering the best service possible as a future council, whatever that may look like. So thank you very much for answering those questions, and we will progressively have meetings alongside Bapeni Regional Council. So at the moment we've worked really closely as Mayor with the Chairperson and both the CEs, but you will start to see that we'll schedule in meetings for updates and information sessions with them, and we will be starting shortly around geothermal, which I know is of interest to this council, and in particular potential of using geothermal fields for energy. So that's just an example of how we'll continue to work together and keep us all informed as we move forward. Thank you.
Can I just add something? Thank you, Mayor Tapswan. Maybe Sam can correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is that this LTP will not include any regional council functions. Because I understand that at the moment the legislation doesn't allow us to do that, and that even based on the Head Start policy announcement I've seen, that 2737 LTP will not allow territorial authorities to include regional council functions in their long-term plans, which obviously are subject to audit. But
yeah, that's correct. I don't have any more to add to that.
Okay. So we don't have any plans, and we won't be asking for any funding for any of the regional council functions in this LTP. I think as we move into the transition and start to discuss things with regional council, we'll be able to better understand that to inform the 2030 or perhaps an annual plan before that.
Yeah, it would only be if something changed in the creation of that bespoke legislation and something happened in that time. But I imagine with the time frame of even submitting the detailed proposal and us completing our long-term plan, that we'd have to go off what the current legislation is.
Thank you. I'll just hand it back to Mayor Tapsell.
Thank you. And just so I don't confuse councillors or staff, my questions and comments are regarding the strategy themselves. So when we're planning for not only the next 10 but the next 30 years, we should be using this time to cater for the change that we know is coming. So yes, long-term plan is a different thing entirely, but both this council and Local Government New Zealand have consistently been advocating for some relief or some changes, knowing that we're all embarking on the business as usual of a long-term plan, but there will be changes within the next 10 years for sure. So thank you for clarifying that, and hopefully that's clear in the understanding.
Thank you for the context. There is Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick one. I know that our CCOs don't come under these strategies, especially this one, the environmental one, but I'm just wondering, especially, and I support the Mayor's comments before, if we're talking about, the climate resilience and the public infrastructure impacts on the environment, etc., would it not be a good idea to have some kind of incorporation with our CCO, I'm guessing primarily our airport, probably not Rotorua NZ, on having some kind of synergy or having them involved or brought under this?
Yeah, so Councillor Wang, all your assets, all your significant assets are covered by the strategy, including airport assets. So this is the opportunity for councillors to have input into it, and then that would need to, giving effect to the infrastructure strategy can be something that you direct your CCO to give effect to through the letter of expectation, and then you would expect to see that back in their statement of intent. So absolutely, the asset management of assets that are operated by CCOs would absolutely be part of these strategies. Airport, Energy Event Centre, South Morrison Centre, all of them.
Thank you. Just checking if there's any questions from Councillor Brown online. And if there's not, we'll move on to the next part, which is the Trade Waste Discharge Plan.
Thank you. So a new legislative requirement is that Council must prepare and adopt a Trade Waste Discharge Plan. This plan will establish the long-term strategic direction for the management and regulation of trade waste discharges to ensure adverse effects on the wastewater network, treatment infrastructure, public health and the environment are effectively managed. The legislation requires Council to develop a draft plan, undertake public consultation, consider submissions and feedback, and adopt a final plan by the 27th of August 2027. Preparing the plan will provide an opportunity to review existing trade waste management practices and ensure Council's approach remains aligned with legislative requirements and community expectations. The plan will set Council's overall strategic approach to the management and regulation of trade waste discharges to the wastewater network. It will establish the framework for regulating trade waste activities and premises, including how trade waste is managed, monitored for compliance and funded through appropriate cost recovery mechanisms. The plan will define the objectives, policies and regulatory requirements that will be implemented and enforced through the Trade Waste Bylaw. The Trade Waste Bylaw will provide the legal powers and enforceable rules necessary to give effect to the plan. Individual trade waste permits will sit beneath the plan and bylaw, setting site-specific discharge requirements, conditions, limits and monitoring obligations for individual customers. The plan must address several important strategic challenges, including protecting the wastewater system and receiving environment, managing trade waste with an available wastewater capacity, preventing stormwater from entering the wastewater network, responding to emerging organic compounds, and recognising tikanga and cultural considerations associated with new waste streams. The plan also needs to provide a future-focused, risk-based framework that can adapt to changing technologies, contaminants, and community expectations while supporting sustainable growth and environmental protection. It will establish clear principles for what Council is prepared to accept into the wastewater system and under what conditions. Key policy choices include protecting treatment capacity and growth, preventing stormwater from entering the network, determining appropriate management of geothermal discharges, controlling high risk and emerging contaminants, and ensuring the costs of managing trade waste are fairly recovered from those generating it. These decisions will help protect infrastructure, support environmental outcomes and provide certainty for industry and the community.
And we'll have question time. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to double check that the trade waste discharge plan, that will also allow us to treat, or not to treat, but to deal with zinc as a runoff of galvanised steel, won't it?
Yeah, that's correct. I think it's not a long time ago that industrial sites used to discharge all kind of contaminants onto the land around their factories, and obviously gradually we worked in a way that will limit what they can discharge. But trade waste is also another leverage, another mechanism through which we can control what goes into our municipal wastewater system, because ultimately it's got an impact both in our treatment processes, but also in our receiving environment. Zinc is one of those things that, it's monitored very carefully under the trade waste. And actually our new comprehensive stormwater concerns requires us to monitor the quality and the content of zinc into stormwater leaving industrial properties before it enters the waterways.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just looking at pages 24 and 25 under strategic challenges and considerations, talking about protecting the wastewater system and receiving environment, keeping stormwater out of our wastewater network, emerging organic compounds, and also high risk or emerging contaminants. That's not all to do with trade. though, is it, in industry? That's actually part of a challenge across the whole of our network.
In broad terms, yes. For each one of our households, we all use food and chemicals to clean our laundries and so on. However, the concentrations of high level of emerging compounds are much higher in areas of industry areas. For example, we are now going to do a concerted effort to understand what leaves the Rotorua hospital, gets into wastewater. We're going to monitor what's happening out of our old CAP landfill that enters into the wastewater system. We've got facilities that extract geothermal activity like the Wairiki, spa down, on the waterfront there too. So we limit how much of their geothermal water they can inject into our wastewater. So it's a combination of factors, and yes, each household contributes to that, but the system is designed to accommodate that. We just have to be very careful not to allow heavy volumes and heavy concentrations from industrial sites to reach our wastewater system.
Thank you. Just a subsequent on that. So you've mentioned many times before the volume of runoff from our roads is significantly higher contributor to pollution compared to anything else. Have we got any way of dealing with that?
I think what Councillor Sanford asked earlier, water in itself, the volume of stormwater is 200 to 2,000 times more than we are able to treat in our wastewater system. The trade waste is, especially controlling contaminants like zinc, and paints and diesels and things like that, intends to capture it in the industrial sites. We already started doing some pilot schemes upstream of the Utuhina and Magakahi streams for debris collection points. We have our comprehensive stormwater concern that actually specifies the level of contaminants that can enter waterways. We are exploring the possibility of and piloting at the moment to empty cesspits. We've got about 5,500 cesspits on roadsides, and we have a certain cleaning regime at the moment, but going forward in the future, we're exploring the possibility of more frequently emptying them so we can capture all the contaminants being attracted to solids and remove them from the stormwater flows. So all these sort of things are gradually implemented, and obviously the various regulations and the resource concern conditions will have further inform us to these activities.
Thank you.
Councillor, if I can also add to that, and this might interact with some other pieces of work that come through to you in the long-term plan or in preparing the long-term plan, and that's a level of service review. So as was mentioned, the practice in New Zealand, and as far as I understand everywhere in the world, is runoff from roads ultimately ends up in the environment without going through a treatment plant of any sort. There are some rudimentary measures such as catch pits, cesspits, debris interceptors that might be applied. And we spoke earlier about the frequency of cleaning. That is one of the levels of service that will be reviewed as part of the levels of service review, because we're operating under directions to minimise cost as much as possible, and all of these things have a cost. Cost of contractors driving around to cesspits, cleaning them, all of that certainly adds cost. And if we were to look at increasing those levels of service, that would obviously be additional costs in the years to come. And we're cautious about doing that under this council's directions.
Thank you, CE. There appears to be no further questions. Is there anything else that the staff might like to add before we close off today?
No, thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, this is just, the presentation to inform elected members of what our infrastructure strategy and the water strategy and the property strategy tries to cover. However, a lot of more detail will come in the actual documents of the strategy come to you. And you do need to be aware, as elected members, that those strategies will be part and parcel and publicly consulted in the long-term plan consultation process, so provided you have adopted them. So this is an opportunity to start for you as elected members to ask questions. Do I find relevant information useful to my questions into these documents? And because of the community, we are asking similar questions coming back after the consultation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your attendance today, councillors, and your questions. I noted there was a few questions that may require further discussion later on, and I just want to thank the staff for answering those for us and for giving us a high-level overview of these four key pieces of information that are going to feed into our long-term plan. So on that note, I will close off the workshop and actually ask Councillor Te Marabenfell if he would close us with a karakia, please.
Kia ora tēnā tātou, kia iri tātou. Te whakaitane, tēnei te kaupapa kea, tēnei te wānana kea, tēnei te mauri o te kaupapa ka whakamoia, tēnei te mauri o te wānana ka whakamoia. Kua ki runa, kua ki raro, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e.
Thank you, Councillor Te Marabenfell. I declare the workshop closed.